Chapter 27. I was vaguely aware of an unpadded shoulder cutting into my belly as blood rushed to my upside-down head. Then I was lying flat on my back atop a foul-smelling dumpster, Gunner's hands rubbing heat back into my limbs. "Damn it, wake up." I wasn't unconscious, and I tried to tell him as much, but the attempted words instead came out as a moan, even as the scent of fur dampened into bitter-almond concern. Gunner dropped his sword, I realized, the words materializing far more slowly than they should have, as my own starball-turned weapon throbbed in my clenched right fist, which explained why I was suddenly weak as a newborn kitten, unable to do more than roll over onto my side and strain against the darkness in search of the other half of my soul. To my relief, the second sword hadn't entirely disappeared into the night. Instead, it was clearly visible 20 feet distant, lying at the feet of a snarling werewolf. If I could just... Before I could muster sufficient energy to do anything, though, Gunner was tilting my torso upright and piercing me with the intensity of his gaze. Talk to me." He sounded so desperately worried, and even though I knew I had more important matters to contend with, I succumbed to the fuzzy need within my belly, raised my left hand, trailed 2 fingers along the knife edge of his jaw, then jerked aside as skin-on-skin contact hit me like an electric shock. Even the mud in my brain settled in that moment, and this time, when I yanked at the distant sword with all of my remaining vigor, the weapon gradually dislodged itself from the ground and began dragging itself toward my wiggling fingers. Meanwhile, I did my best to stem Gunner's angst by letting him know I wasn't actually perishing at his feet. "I'm fine," I told him, the words coming out more like I-fi. Unfortunately, from the whiteness surrounding the alpha's lips, my consolation hadn't hit its intended mark. But I'd be able to mollify my companion with fully formed words sooner rather than later, because the sword was arcing up toward us now, slicing through the ear of a werewolf who had been attempting to scramble up the sheer side of the dumpster, protecting us from the melee below. The four-legger yelped, and Gunner whirled, and I did the only thing I could think of to prevent my companion from seeing a sword break the laws of physics as it flew upward toward our perch. I allowed the weapon in my right hand to dissolve into starlight, then used those freed digits to pull my companion's head down toward me. After that, I kissed him, our lips merging together, even as metal turned magic reunited with my grasping left hand. Hot and sweet and rough all at once, enchantment and sensation exploded inside me in a jumbled mixture that could have been pure passion, or might have just been the energetic reunion with my starball-turned sword. Either way, I didn't have long to ponder the issue, because Jackal was no dummy, and his henchmen had access to human fingers if they chose them. So it didn't take long for several two-leggers to build a ramp of debris leading to our aerial retreat, while others maintained their four-legged forms to serve as the vanguard. Now, muzzles mounted the dumpster, hot breath sneaking down the top of my boots, while blood-crazed eyes glowed against the night. "Shift," I ordered Gunner, breaking our connection as quickly as it had begun, and pushing backwards out of his arms. For half a second, he continued to hold me. But then the alpha's eyes cleared and sharpened as the air filled with incipient fur. Gunner must have assumed I intended to join him in four-legged battle, because he didn't spare me a second glance, just dropped down into the form of his wolf, fragments of shredded clothing spraying out around him. And while I would have liked to once again stand back-to-back with the alpha and fend off Jackal's underlings, our kiss had reawoken the countdown timer inside my head. If Jackal wasn't the kidnapper, then someone else was out there threatening the life of my sister, and that someone had left me a very small window in which to reach the South Street Bridge. There was no world in which I chose to ignore the mandated meeting, and given the contents of that note, it was safer to do so without being trailed by even a friendly wolf. So as Jackal's army leapt up onto the dumpster one after another, I backed away, rather than raising my sword and diving into battle. Gunnar growled at the intruders, protecting me with his body, and I took advantage of his lapse of attention to slide through the cracked window behind us and leave my overprotective companion at arms behind. I was used to traversing the city in solitude, so why did I suddenly feel so queasy as I left the Alpha to fight off a dozen werewolves with nothing but his claws and teeth? Gunnar can take care of himself, I muttered under my breath, guilt dogging my footsteps as I ran down graffitied steps and entered the nearest subway station. I'd evaded Pickle Breath and 3 of his cronies along the way, the teenager's presence suggesting he'd been dogging my footsteps earlier as a paid lackey of the werewolf I'd recently fought against. But neither shifter nor human would be able to follow after metal wheels and the press of humanity eradicated my trail. I pulled out bills to feed the fare machine, then inhaled sharply as I realized what I held within my hand. Ma Scrubs's doorman hadn't presented me with a big wad of 20s this afternoon the way I'd expected. No, these were $100 bills, far more than I would have expected to rake in over the course of a month, let alone from a single night's work. I hesitated, but a far too close howl returned me to my senses. There was a train incoming, and I needed to be through those doors before anyone caught up and followed on my heels. So I pushed the bills deeper into my pocket, zipped the closure, then rushed through the turnstile at a sprint. And 20 minutes and 2 transfers later, I was emerging from the underground maze, with the breeze off the river ruffling through my hair. I'd made it. 10 minutes early, even. The brightly lit bridge arcing over the water that flowed endlessly underneath. And sure, I lacked a game plan, but I trusted my fox senses and my starball to get me out of any pinch. Plus, there was always the arena windfall to consider. Maybe Kira's kidnapper would be willing to trade my sister for cold hard cash. Padding away from my destination rather than toward it, I took in the bridge a second time out of the corner of one eye. The kidnapper would have arrived hours earlier, I suspected, both to scout the area and to ensure I didn't appear at the head of an army of werewolves. So I wasn't surprised when flickers of movement materialized into dark-coated figures, scattered hither and yon across the open expanse. Wasn't surprised, but was prompted toward deeper stealth. There were half a dozen of the watchers. One pretended to read a newspaper on a bench by the bus stop. One walked a dog down the sidewalk, and 2 lingered on nearby rooftops. It was the 6th waiting figure, however, who gave me the clue that my initial read of the situation had been dramatically off-kilter. His sedan idled down by the river, the glow of a cigarette lighting his stubbled face. The male looked like any hardened criminal, but his car was too blocky and well-maintained to mesh with that disguise. I took a step back, adrenaline flooding my bloodstream, because while I'd thought I was walking into one kind of trap, it appeared I had instead nearly stumbled into another. These men weren't aligned with Kira's kidnapper. No, these figures keeping eyes peeled for newcomers were instead entirely human. They were city cops.